Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the War Report. And we should start the show by acknowledging that Lindsey Graham is in a better place. Now, some of you are probably confused by that comment, but let me explain. I would imagine just about anywhere in this universe, at least most places, are probably better than Kiev during an air raid, which is where he exited this life. So we could say with almost certainty that he is in a better place. Now, I'm not accusing anyone or any government or any state of anything, but I'm just saying some of the details of the official story they they, they leave questions to be asked, which we will be discussing in just a moment here. So I don't know if you have any direct reactions to the longtime senator from South Carolina's deceasement,
It it
demise.
it 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 depends on how much you want to get into it right now.
I figured might as well just go out of the gate with this. This is probably what everyone wants to
Okay.
hear about.
Well, we were just discussing off air, but I saw some people posting on Telegram, like within an hour after his death was announced on Telegram, that the timeline makes no sense, right? So he's back in the US in his home at 8:30 p.m. He makes a call. Now the call goes to his schedule boy. Like, this is a man he's hired to do his schedules. Of course, he's super gay. It has to be a man or a boy or whatever. And the response, at least what the papers are saying, is that his schedule boy asked, "Why are you calling me? Why didn't you call 911?" Which is an interesting response. Like, why would he do that? Right? That makes no sense. Did he think he was going to live and I have to change my schedule? Like, I don't know. I don't know the reason for that. Uh but if you get into the weeds as far as the timeline of him coming back to the US, right? Like, going to Poland from Washington, D.C. should be like a solid 9 hours, if not longer, but a solid 9 hours. Then from Poland, I don't know if you get off at Chopin Airport or you go to the other airport, I forget the name of it, it's closer to the Ukrainian border. But then it's another 10 hours on train, 10 to 11 hours on train, right? Because everybody has seen Macron, everybody has seen Biden,
Well, remember
Lindsey
when
Graham.
the coalition of the willing had that napkin next to them on the train?
Yeah, yeah, they were all doing coke on the Kiev Express.
What a couldn't think of a better place to do it.
That's not the response I thought I was going to hear. Oh my God.
I mean, how fitting. Zelensky invites you and you do a little
Right, right, right.
pre-gaming.
That's right. Don't do it all now. No, Zelly's got more. Um, way more. Remember that Vogue shoot with all those bags? That was that wasn't sand in those bags. So, anyways, then it's a 10-hour train ride from Poland to Kiev. Um, and of course, he has to do all of this going back. Now, if it was a chartered flight, it would be quicker, but he would barely make it. Uh, Long story short, like, he leaves something like 7:30, 8 o'clock. Kiev has to travel 10 hours, then another 10 hours. He should be home between 10 and 11, not 8:30, right? Like, and not even home. Like, he could be at the airport, but then there's still the drive home, which I imagine, Washington's not that big, but I imagine it would take, probably, even with an escort service, not that kind of escort service, but it would take, what, a good 30 minutes, 60 minutes, depending on the traffic, right?
I would
So there's
imagine.
something that doesn't add up. Now, of course, I'm hesitant to believe, like, he went to the drone factory that the Russians blew up, and that's what did it. Like, he could have had the same. He had some kind of medical condition, which is super rare, but is not completely uncommon between men between 50 to 70.
Is it lifestyle related? Or is it that one?
I don't know. It has to deal with blood pressure and stuff, but that's why they presumed that he had a heart attack. So, you know, he could have already had complications. I don't know. I don't know exactly what happened, but it could have been that, he was terrified. Zelensky obviously survived, right? And they were together you know, um, in Kiev checking out, the drone factory. He was at Ankara. Now, he wasn't allowed to speak in any bilateral talks, but there's always talks on the sidelines. And he was in a talk on the sidelines with Zelensky and Trump and probably Hegseth, right? So I don't know. I don't know what happened, but the truth of what happened is not, I don't think, being told. Um, his again, the weird response. Why are you? I mean, he seems very authentic. Why are you calling me? Why aren't you calling 911? And he says, "Well, I want you to call 911." There's something very strange about that. But it could also, there's also something that someone like him, who has literally no honor, and is obsessed with politics and political power, might just say. I mean, I can see why the Russians would want to kill him, right? He back in 2022, he was saying somebody has to take out Putin. That's the only way this thing ends. Spoiler. So, uh, he mentioned that at least twice during the time of the SMO. Um, he was beaming while in Kiev with Zelensky, how this is the best investment ever made. We're killing a lot of Russians.
Yeah, and how many times has he gotten up and said the Ukrainians are dying for us, or it's a good
Yes,
thing that Russians and Ukrainians are killing each other, and a number of these statements. And that's not even getting into his comments about Israel and Palestine, which is a whole nother thing that I'll talk about in a couple minutes here. But I just want to follow up on your point. What I would have to imagine happened, what makes the most sense to me, is that he
mm,
goes to Ukraine. He's in the middle of this air raid, and because of his health condition, because of his age, because of a number of different factors, he has a stress-induced heart attack and drops dead in Kiev. That's what I
it
would
could.
assume.
Right, right. Now, it could very well be that. And a Russian agent put Novichok in
Oh
his,
yes.
in his heart medication.
Well, and with some of the stuff we'll talk about later, we do know now that Russian agents are just crawling over Ukraine.
Oh yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah, it's called just like half the population. but but no, I'm getting sidetracked. I'm getting sidetracked. Now, I do think it's interesting you bring up that Lindsey Graham has made those bellicose statements in the past about something needs to be done about Putin. We need to hit them hard. All the belligerence he's thrown out since even before 2022. But I will say, and not that I think this is your position, but I will say in general to the people who do speculate this, the idea that the Russian state, if they were going to start going after high value targets, would pick Lindsey Graham of all people, does not make sense to me.
It doesn't to me
When you
either.
have Zelensky, you have Syrskyi, you have Budanov, you have a number of different people that they could have gone after. Depending on how provocative they are, several European heads of state, Ursula von der Leyen, any of these people, like if they wanted a high profile target to quote unquote send a message, Lindsey Graham doesn't seem like the guy. But I also, in that case, don't foresee them calling off an operation because Lindsey Graham might be caught in the crossfire.
Right, right. And we'll get into it later, but the Russians have really up the escalation in retaliation to uh, the Ukrainian mid-range drone strikes. So I don't think they were going to put that on pause because Lindsay was at a drone factory. The drone factory is going to go. It has to go.
Yeah, I mean, I know you can't really compare military doctrines or really sanity of the leadership as much as one may want to complain about Putin and how restrained he is or how much the Russians pull their punches, whatever you might want to say. Uh, Clearly, we as the United States or our quote unquote allies in Israel or allies in Ukraine, wherever, have not called off certain operations because of who might be caught in the crossfire. Whether we're talking about high profile targets, whether we're talking about a children's school, as we saw at the beginning of the Iran war, and just about a month ago in Ukraine as well, and number of different examples I could sit here all day and go on about. But point being, it's ridiculous to expect that we need to hold back because we might lose Lindsey Graham. An international incident might be caused over Lindsey Graham. And as far as Washington's response, I believe that if Lindsey Graham did die in Kiev, not necessarily because of the strikes, but in circumstances related to the strikes, nobody's going to want to touch that because they would have to, number one, really acknowledge to a way that they don't normally how deep her involvement in Ukraine is, especially under Mr. Peacemaker. He's going to end the Ukraine war in 24
Oh
hours
yeah.
or before he comes to office or whatever the outlandish promise is. And number two, I think it's also admitting to Russian military capabilities that they don't want to admit to publicly.
It was an Iskander armed with Novichok. That's that's what that's what finally did in Lindsay.
I
Take
bet that
that.
was Assad's idea.
Yeah, finish Vladimir. Finish him. Can you imagine?
It's amazing that Zelensky got on unscathed, though.
Yeah. That's what I mean. There's something that doesn't add up even with that. Like I don't know. Maybe his
Imagine Lindsey
schedule.
Graham throwing him under the bus to try to cause a false flag to start World War III.
Yeah, that's right. We need America in Ukraine.
Mr. Trump, they kill your good golfing buddy Lindsey Graham. You must go to war. Now that I say it, that probably isn't too far off of what happened.
Yeah.
That they sacrificed that Zelensky sacrificed Lindsey Graham to try to escalate the war.
That's right. It's less esoteric,
But also makes a lot of sense if you think about it.
I know.
That's the first time I've heard this take. I don't like to pat ourselves in the back for that kind of thing, but I haven't heard anyone else make that take. So, it's ours.
Lindsay, you stay here. I'll be back in an hour. Kaboom. I don't. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't care that he's dead.
Yeah, like
he's a despicable man, anyways.
yeah, I agree. I have no tears for him. I mean, like just for personal standards, I'm not going to stand here and tap dance on his grave, and I'm not going to judge anyone else for doing it.
Yeah,
though.
yeah,
But it's not anything I'm weeping over.
yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know. He did constantly get reelected, so we don't have to worry about him getting reelected, but he probably will be replaced with another scumbag.
Yeah, so far they said that they're throwing his wife in the temporary position until they have the actual election.
I think it's his sister, right?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, McCain's wife. They did that with it. Look, it all. Oh,
Yeah.
oh no! I just realized what I said. I
He
realized.
doesn't have a wife.
Yeah.
He would never have a wife.
Yeah. You caught me in a very stupid moment because I was thinking about McCain because they put McCain's
Yes.
wife in there after he died, but they
That's
put
right.
his sister there because of course Lindsey Graham does not have a wife.
Yeah.
Doesn't even have a husband. He's allowed to. Anything goes these days, but I guess he doesn't want to. Yeah. Too bad, I guess. But something I did hear that was interesting about the electoral politics of all of this. I was listening to That show with George Samueli and the RT guy. What's his name?
Oh, Peter Lavelle.
Yes, him. What they were talking about electorally, which I thought was interesting, is that with people like Graham and McConnell, the way they lure people in is they get them to do these things, particularly with the court appointments, where they can go home every 6 years and say, "Look, we got you these awesome Supreme Court justices who vote for birthright citizenship. Don't you want to reelect us for another term?" And apparently, the conservative bases in states like Kentucky and South Carolina eat that stuff up.
It's insane.
So that's how they funnel these people in there. But I agree with you that whoever replaces him in a more permanent sense after his sister, let me just be very clear about it, his sister does not have a wife. That's probably the dumbest thing I've ever said on the show, and I did not even realize it until after I did that. But and while his sister holds the temporary position, the party apparatus is going to crank somebody out there, and then the off chance some Democrat takes the seat, who it's not going to be any different. I mean, who are we kidding? But I will say, as far as somebody who was such an advocate for all this stuff, they are short one man, so that's a good thing at least. Even if they do put somebody with all his ideas in there, they probably won't find somebody who is as pedantic and driven about those ideas as he was. So there's that at least.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Remember about Gaza, he said Israel should bomb Gaza the way we bombed Tokyo and Dresden. Like
Yeah,
that's how warped he is. That was. Thank God it's now was. Um,
but yeah, it's I do remember that, and then saying he also escalated from that, saying Hiroshima and Nagasaki, saying, "Well, they're under threat, so they can do anything that is necessary to justify their survival,
oh
except
yeah.
make a deal.
Yeah.
Can't do that." But other than that, you look at the man's record. That's what he lived for. And let me remind a lot of people, not that I think there's really anyone in our audience who would probably think this, the people trying to whitewash his legacy, saying, "Oh well, he was a real good Republican aside from being bad on foreign policy." Let's look at this guy's history. In 2016, he's one of like what 16 people in the Republican primaries, and he's up there, and he's um, rambling and uh, ranting about Trump, saying he's such an awful guy. I could never support him. He's against
Oh
it. Yeah,
yeah.
he's not a real Reagan conservative. That was the real big talking point back then. And then suddenly Trump gets the nomination. Hey Trump, want to go golfing? We're best friends. Hey Trump, I know all the right escorts. If you swing that way, I know what you did with Bill Clinton all those years ago, so you might be
Yeah.
interested.
Bubba. I know you go way back with Bubba.
So there's that at least. And then 2020, he stabs us in the back, saying like, "Oh, of course Biden is president. Let's do it this way." And oh, Biden, I love your Ukraine policy. I hate everything else, and you need to go harder on Gaza. Trump comes back in. He's his best friend ever since 2025. He's been whispering in Trump's ear about what he needs to do about foreign policy, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the one thing that I guess I don't know if you want to call them populist ink, rightoids, like any of the pejorative, pick your preferred pejorative for these kind of Trump loyalists against their own better judgment. They point to the Brett Kavanaugh vote from 2018. That's how we know Lindsey Graham is our guy. Ignore everything else. Mind you,
Meanwhile, he was adamant about like granting citizenship to migrants.
and
Uh,
Obama's court appointees, he voted for those.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Like this is your base right winger. It's okay because Lindsey Graham redeemed himself. No, he
so
did not.
based.
He did not. Like what? You know what I think it is. You know what I think actually happened.
Mm.
Notice how Mitch McConnell was
Yeah.
alive and well after this. Now,
Yes.
I'm no esotericist. I'm no studier of the occult or anything like that. But I find the timing coincidental. Perhaps some things happened. One thing was traded for another.
Mm.
Um, Look, I'm just saying our elites are into very weird stuff. We know this from not only the Epstein files, but just a number of different things that they are into these weird esoteric movements, and a lot of them. I'm not saying most of them, but I'm saying a lot of them are genuine believing in those things. So I don't know. Maybe something happened that way.
Yeah, yeah, it could be. It could be.
Yeah.
McConnell lives, but they needed a sacrifice,
Yeah.
and
They, they,
what
they,
a
they had to they had
sacrifice!
to sacrifice the rook to save the queen.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
To
it's all.
imagine how sad Netanyahu was when they told him.
You think he cared?
Yeah, I know I'm giving him too much credit, but I'm thinking he would prefer Lindsay over McConnell.
Yeah. He's like sad in the same way that like a
Why does
stock
dark
trader.
magic have to work this way? Get my Kabbalist experts in here.
Mr. Netanyahu, you never paid much attention to us before. Are we finally rebuilding the third temple? No, that's just how we keep the goyim on our side. This is more important.
Delays.
But with all that being said, I suppose we should actually talk about the place where Lindsey Graham's life probably ended, which is Ukraine. Wait. Before
Mm.
that, I do want to talk about just a couple other things that he was one a big advocate for and two a supporter for in Congress. And number one is the bone crushing sanctions.
Oh
So,
yes, because they were in agreement that a new sanctions package 21, uh, had to be included very soon, and of course he got the go ahead for all that. Like I mean I don't know. It's yeah. I mean that to me is neither here nor there.
yeah, it's not. It's to be expected. But apparently, after he had died, and one of the reasons he was in Ukraine is he was announcing this to Zelensky, talking about, "Oh, don't worry, Zelensky, we got your back. It's okay. We're finally going to get those secondary sanctions and crash the global economy just for you." But apparently, after he croaked, Trump was already reconsidering the severity of these sanctions packages, and there was a bunch of question marks thrown up about all those. And as it stands now, the sanctions packages in Europe are being held up, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. And it looks like the one that they're going to pass now is significantly less aggressive than the one that was slated under Graham's suggestion, under his sponsorship. So we'll see what comes of that. And wouldn't that just be a wonderful end to his legacy where he can't even get his life's work passed in a congressional vote? But
Yeah. I mean, 71 is young. I mean, the final thing I'll say is some process must have already begun while he was either in Ukraine or Poland. Like, I mean, like he might have already had been experiencing failure, like heart failure of some kind or another, or high blood pressure. I don't know, but I think there is a very strong likelihood he was already dead by the time he arrived. I,
oh,
I don't know.
absolutely. I seen look, either they lied to us about his time of death or they lied to us about his location of death. It's
Mm.
the only two ways about it. But I will say, speaking of congressional acts, it looks like the integration bill or the caveat in the National Defense Authorization Act to integrate U.S. and Israeli intelligence was actually, I'll say stifled. I don't want to say struck down because, as far as I
Mm.
know, there still is an avenue for it to happen. But it has been set back by the Democrats. And some of you may be confused by this. I was thinking, well, clearly they're just the left wing of the Zionist bird, if you will. And well, I think that's largely true. They're doing damage control because they know that
It's
Israel has gone too
wildly
far.
unpopular. It is intensely unpopular. Yeah.
And what I think we're seeing right now, heading into 2026 and 2028, is that the Democrats are going to pose themselves not as an anti-Israel party, but as the party that can make Israel behave itself. Because
Mm,
they're not going to go explicitly anti-Zionist. They're not at that point yet. But they are concerned about the overall status of the American empire because it's just as much their project as it is the Republican project. And in some ways, arguably more if you look at just like a broader view of history on that. So they see Israel right now tanking that. Uh, Now, they'll be dumb enough to support all the other foreign policy adventures that also degrade the American empire, but the Gaza thing has been a black mark like no other, especially among their base. And there's just
yeah.
simply no getting around that. So these next few
So
years
much
here.
depends on like so much of America's soft power depends on the perception that the world has about how it deals with Israel and the Palestinians. And it's unavoidable. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It is what it is. And yeah.
Yeah, it is just that simple. And you can point to other places where the Americans have aided and directly partaken in similar actions. I'll say once again, the Starobelsk bombing just about a month ago, I would say is as an isolated case is just as bad as anything that's happened in Gaza. Now, of course, the consistency and the frequency is fortunately much less, but that's also because Russia has nukes. Let's just be honest about that. And the thing about the Gaza issue, about the Palestine issue, is that it's simply been so heavy-handed that much of the world cannot ignore it, and even among people who you think normally wouldn't care about Arab Sunni Muslims, such as myself. That's how bad it's gotten, just to put it in complete perspective, that people who otherwise would not have thought twice about this part of the world have been subjected to 24/7 carnage since October 7th, broadcasted just about everywhere, that Israel needs to be put in its place, at least in an ostensible sense. I'm not saying anything actually has to happen to them, but somebody has to be willing to be the one who chastises Israel or the one who is willing to wag their finger at them, even if there's no significant action. Now, maybe some of
And
the.
and part of the reason for this is America also, besides the soft power of being the legitimate policeman of the world and having the morals on display to justify it, is if it looks like the most belligerent and shit country in the world, Israel is actually running your country, that's also not going to work for soft power projection.
No, of course not. And even among people who normally would have never spoken in these terms, like Zog or Israeli occupation or Israeli control, these are becoming punchlines among people who would not have known what any of these things meant 2 years
Yeah.
ago.
Like they're literally from like our neck of the woods. They're not even how are the I mean, you check out a guy like what's his name, Rathbone.
Yeah,
You check him out, and it's like he is saying literally I mean, he is saying stuff that is like first Trump administration, alt right, for first term of Trump. That's what it sounds like. The same kind of anti-Semitic jokes, blah blah blah. He constantly makes them. Like hate it for 2,000 years. What are you doing wrong? Stuff. You wouldn't imagine. Of course, none of that would have been possible without Israel having done what it has done the last 3 years. So
yeah. It required them going mask off, which the reason Israel went mask off is because they knew their support was slipping otherwise, and they decided, well, it's going downhill anyway, so let's just do what we want and make sure to secure everything before our base of support either dies off or abandons us, as we saw happening with much of the right, to the point where the only people on the right who noticeably support Israel now are um, the old guard boomer neoconservatives or whatever shills they've managed to dig up to toe the party line about how supporting Israel is based in first worldist or whatever the stupid line is.
Yeah, yeah. I don't even know how people take that shit seriously.
Yeah, I mean it's gotten to a point where once
Like
again,
you don't know what like white interests are. Like you're still this is still up for debate. What? Like like they fail every test,
and what drives me
and then
it's
then they make up like silly new rules that redefine, oh, here's how we actually didn't fail the test.
yeah. If we just support Israel enough, they'll let us do anti-immigration laws. Okay, who made you that deal? Who came up and said that? What's your basis for this? There's nothing there. You're just thinking if you dance the dance enough, they might look the other way instead of pumping your country full of migrants, which is what they do. The Likud party is just as complicit, if not more, than all of the left wing NGO organizations run by their co ethnics, run by their cousins, by the way. It's
Hmm.
it's an operation, and it's always been an operation. And then my favorite one are the anti-jihad people who think that Israel's on the front line against Islamic terrorism when they're the ones who helped put Jelani in power, when they're the ones who have supported every Sunni jihadist movement if it meant the Iranians uh,
Yeah, yeah.
lost any amount of territory or any amount of influence in the region. It's like, no, Israel is one of the largest supporters of Islamic terrorism in the world.
Yeah,
And
this is video I saw this week of this, British guy. He obviously served in Afghanistan, and he's all upset about his freedoms and how, I mean, it's a separate issue in some ways, but he saw, how veterans, uh, almost all countries disrespect their veterans, right? In a way they don't trust them, especially the ones that survive. But um, but he's complaining about losing his freedom. He's losing the country, and he served and protected Britain in Afghanistan. It's like, what were you doing in Afghanistan, right? And then you look at the figures of, that year, the most amount of refugees coming into Britain. Wow, they were from Afghanistan, and then, in other countries that were destabilized prior to Afghanistan or alongside that, like Iraq. Like, I don't know if like if people are that willfully stupid, like, you have to understand you cannot give these particular elites anything. Nothing is negotiable.
no, they will do nothing for you. The, if you want an idea of what they'll do for you, is they'll give you Donald Trump and they'll let him say a few things about immigration or nationalism or whatever else,
Hmm.
and then you get Donald Trump. Or if you want a European equivalent, Maloney or um, whatever Le Pen's party is calling itself now. They change their name every 3 years, every time they lose an election. Yet
Yes.
she keeps running. It's as if she's a ringer. I don't know. Beats me. No, sorry, it beats her because she never wins anything. But there's dozens of examples across the European continent and in the UK of these parties that never do anything. Farage, well, Reform Britain, or I know some people have hope for Restore, but I'm not holding my breath. I know how these
Mm.
things usually turn out. Sure, you can give credit to the individual man, but what's that going to do against the actual entrenched system? Probably not much, even if he is 100% genuine, which I'd like to think he is, if I'm allowed to be a little optimistic. Even the most genuine man in the world isn't going to take down the behemoth just by public statements. It's not going to happen that way. But once again, that's the trade-off you get. You get feel-good nationalist rhetoric every 4 to 5 years, every election cycle, while we go back to business as usual, and that's what your quote-unquote deal with the Zionists is. Just to
Yeah, yeah.
just to put a cap on that.
Yeah, they'll never give you what you want because they're always they're always afraid of, mid-century Germany. Like, I mean, that is their rationale. That is how they think.
Oh, absolutely. That is always what it goes back to.
They don't want you to be a monolithic state where they are a minority that stands out.
Look, you're only allowed to fly the funny windmill if you're marching into a war against one of our other enemies, like with Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
Like so long as the metaphorical and sometimes literal guns are pointed in the opposite direction as them, you can do whatever you want. In that regard, but the minute you try to do something that would undermine their interests, the minute that I don't know the barrel of the rifle goes, the hypothetical rifle, of course, goes a little bit too close, even just an inch off of that, then they start freaking out, ranting and raving. And it is funny. Speaking of Ukraine, you notice they do this when these Azov guys, when they're out on the front line, getting encircled in whatever the next fortress belt city is. That's okay. That's great. They're patriots. They're freedom fighters. But the minute they start, I don't know, complaining about Zelensky or about pride parades in Ukraine or anything like that, it's terrible. The far right neo Nazis in Ukraine suddenly exist. We denied their existence before, but the minute they oppose the American Empire's social policy, it's horrible. They need to be shut down and sent back to the front lines.
Yeah.
And it's this pattern over and over. It's like that's what you get. That's what your quote unquote based agreement with the American Empire or the Zionists always turns out being. And I don't know how there's people still falling for this. Maybe it's just hopeless optimism. Maybe they're paid off. I'm not sure which is worse. But I'm not sure how many different ways I can keep saying this. But I see that you did send some Ukraine maps. If you just wanted to do a brief minutia minute with those.
Yeah, I'll do a brief minutia minute. Hang on. Yes. Okay, so we begin with Western Zaporozhye. This is an area where the Ukrainians have successfully pushed the Russians well south of Magdalevka. The Russians are still holding on to parts of Stepove. Now, one of the things that has started to happen in the last 24, 48 hours is that the Russians have begun a new counteroffensive, particularly in Zaporozhye, east and west. So that includes some of the areas around the Donbass. But this is the one where it's along the Dnieper River, which is no longer a river. It's overgrown with moss. I'm sure that, I mean, not moss, but with vegetation of whatever kind, mostly weeds. And there's probably just a small creek that runs through it. The next map is just a wee bit east of there, and this is an area where the Ukrainians have had less success, but this is the area just outside of Orehev. Again, there's some movements, some areas east of Orehev that the Ukrainians have captured, and then there's some movements from the south where the Russians are pushing north towards Orehev. This is an area where there's been less change. The next slide. Now we're getting into eastern Zaporozhye, getting close to the Donbass. And I want you to look at this because, of course, this is the main city that the Russians are pushing out from is Gulyapolye and Dobropolye to the north. Now, if you notice in this map, of course, you can see the Russians have gained some large territories. A town was also taken. This is from yesterday, so we're recording on Friday, July the 17th. So these are maps from July the 16th. But you notice near the right-hand corner, there's that yellow. That yellow is now a new color that Syriac Maps is using, basically to say that this is a porous area and both sides are in there with a small number of men that are constantly fighting it out, if that makes sense. And then the red is Russia and the blue is Ukraine.
Yeah, so the gray zone is now the yellow zone.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So that's eastern Zaporozhye. And now we can get into, let me see where this is. Oh, one more from eastern Zaporozhye. This is an area just south of Pokrovsk. Um, Remember, the Russians already a few weeks ago captured Grishina, or well, a few months ago, but they're expanding from there. Unfortunately, I don't have a map. This is an area south of there. If you look at the red, that's basically the Donetsk Republic. The orange outline represents the Dnepropetrovsk Oblast. So this is an area that the Russians and the Ukrainians have traded back and forth. And so these are just some recent gains that the Russians have been able to make in this area. All through the first half of 2026, the Russians have really been beleaguered in this southern area of Ukraine. Whereas, now I don't have maps, but I can say that in Sunni, the Russians have begun to enter or are on the outskirts of that forest that um, surrounds Sunni on its northern flank. Um, I would say, well, there are probably 3 more good months of vegetation of good weather and thus vegetation that can conceal the Russian troops in there. I still don't know what they would do with because I mean, I don't think Putin has ever wanted to own Ukraine. Even if there wouldn't be an insurgent army that would constantly attack Russian soldiers and Russian towns and so forth and so on. Take for instance the Zaporozhye nuclear power station. The head engineer and his driver were killed in a drone attack after they left Zaporozhye, after they left the power plant, the TPP. So that would just go on and now you could argue that that's already happening, but there would never be a settlement that way. And even if there wasn't an insurgent army, how is Russia going to foot the bill for this? I think even for Russia, it would be much too much. And they would have to make some kind of a lucrative deal, even possibly with former enemies.
Oh yes.
Definitely China would be involved, but there would be other players as well.
Well, if you want an example of Putin not being this madman who just wants to expand, think about the number of opportunities Russia at this point has had to reintegrate Belarus, but has left it as a nominally independent country. And also think about the Minsk agreements, think about the Istanbul agreements, where these all preserved Ukraine as a nominally independent country. Because the logistical hurdles of reintegrating these countries, as much as many Russian nationalists would like to see this, as much as I might even want to see it if I'm being frank, there are a lot of practical considerations that make that into a headache for everyone. And some may argue, and I might be on that side, where you're going to have to do it eventually, otherwise, you're going to lose these lands. But when it comes to the perspective of someone like Vladimir Putin, the idea is to leave these countries nominally independent in Russia's sphere, in Russia's orbit, and go on with that. And especially now with the post war reconstruction, the annexation of the oblasts that they've already taken, that is already going to be a monumental task to rebuild those and get those back up to average standards in the Russian Federation, considering how far Ukrainian infrastructure had fallen since 1991. And
Hmm.
doing that with more and more of Ukraine, especially large rural patches like Sumy, it's just, as it stands now in the short term, untenable.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing there I would disagree with, and I'm glad you added some other points to um, fine tune the message that I was trying to get across.
Oh, certainly.
So the next map is Donetsk. This is actually the area north of Pokrovsk. The Russians have moved outside of Rodinsk and Grishny. They're approaching Svetle. Um, from the south, and then they're pushing towards Dobropolye and Ganovka, which you see near the top of the map. Small gains. This is an area that just as an aside, I think the Institute for the Study of War still doesn't show Pokrov's taken, or it might have been Deep State.
Deep
I mean,
State finally caved on it a couple weeks
it
back.
did, yeah. So then the next map that we've got is the Russians basically widening their control over Konstantinovka. We'll focus in this area, or the area rather north of it, a little more before we end the map content. So you can see that the Russians are moving towards Osivko, Osik, Osikove, and Drushkovka. So the city is taken. They've expanded both east and west, and now really there's just the question of going further north. They're also moving into some pockets that are essentially farmland. As you can see, there's a salient, a pocket forming east of the city on near the top right hand corner. That's all in blue. Um, that's another area, and then we have the areas towards Kramatorsk. So the Russians are now five. I mean, their reconnaissance in force, and this is not reconnaissance in force like 2024 style. The force is much smaller, and the number of men are much smaller. This is like a DRG unit, but some of those forward units are only about 5.5, 6 kilometers. But I would say that the larger concentration of forces are probably 8 kilometers away from the edge of Kramatorsk, and so that's the map that you're looking at. On the far, you can see the 5.5 kilometers, and Kramatorsk northwest of there. The next slide is another area where the Russians are expanding. This is up towards Slavyansk. Um, this is the area where the Russians have had, after Konstantinovka, they've had the most amount of success. If you're just talking about territory, this is it. This is the area. The Russians have expanded their control around Volchansk, which is close to the city Kharkov and the Kharkov Oblast, and we already talked about Sumy. But you can see the Russians. I think this is it. They want to take Donbass by the end of this year and the beginning of 2027. I think that's the goal. And if Zaporozhye has to be sacrificed, if that's just something that they have to slow down the Ukrainians there, they want this. Um, Partly because I think Putin feels like, and rightly so, that he owes the people of Donbass this. He has to do it. And, Konstantinovka has fallen, and when and if Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, especially Kramatorsk, which is one of the areas where the initial resistance against the American-led coup in Ukraine in 2014 occurred, um, that's another area where, like, it's deeply symbolic, and it will be just as symbolic for the Ukrainians as it will be for the Russians. And then finally, we get to Kupiansk. Remember when Gio was on the show, I said that that whole area that had all kinds of pockets, and there were some thin salients that almost reached the Oskal River south of Kupiansk, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you can see now that all of that territory is gone now. It's all in red. And you can see also by the arrows that the Russians have moved into the majority of the city now. The smaller part of the city was, of course, on the eastern side of Kupiansk, and that's the only area that Russia had full control over. There was a small pocket within the western side, very small, but that was being resupplied. Anyways, almost all of western Kupiansk now is taken, except for the southern part and some areas to the northwest. But directly below it, all those towns along the Oskal River now are in Russian hands. So this was another area. Now, just to come back to Slavyansk Kramatorsk, This is a topographical map, and it'll show you why the Russians want to get even closer, but it will show you the directions they want to go. So obviously, blue and green represent the lowlands. Orange, red, pink, and orange represent the highlands. You remember one of the reasons why the Russians had such a difficult time taking over Bakhmut is they had to go through the lowlands while Ukrainian artillery was poised on the highlands, which were west of Bakhmut. Now the Russians, and this is probably explains why they're able to make certain gains. You can see their Bakhmut at the bottom of the map, and you can see that Seversk in the top, which the Russians took in what was it, December or January this year. Anyways, so now they have a height advantage, and they have certain vectors that they can go to take over Drushkovka. So that's the town at the bottom of Kramatorsk. And of course, if you keep following the lowlands, that's where Konstantinovka is. So, but the two big towns are Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and they're just barely. I don't think it's more than like, I don't know, 5 kilometers that separates them. Truly an agglomeration. So I imagine the areas that separate these towns have a little bit more urbanization than what the map might indicate, which really they're just outlines of the official civic laws that determine this is that city and so forth and so on. So, anyways, that's a topographical view. You can see that probably the 5.5 kilometers that separates Kramatorsk. Uh, the Russians have an advantage here if they want to keep pushing, because the ridge line goes into Kramatorsk proper. But you can see that it's the Drushkovka to the south is in a more precarious position. However, you can see on the west side, there are also highlands that the Ukrainians will use to their benefit. So, Drushkovka could be like a big killing field, because both sides will have artillery and snipers on the highlands overlooking, right? Slavyansk will definitely, I think, be the most difficult. Uh, I imagine that the Russians will they're obviously working towards Kramatorsk, right? That's obvious. However, um, and Drushkovka is, well, there's no real supplies that the Ukrainians can give Drushkovka unless it's coming from the east. The south is off limits now, but um, I would say that before they can concentrate on Slavyansk, they will have to take Kramatorsk and Drushkovka.
Well, I think
Just looking at the topographical map.
the worrying thing about all this when it comes down to the fight for the final fortress spell cities right here is that the Ukrainians are going to put everything, every body they can, into not having the humiliation of losing Slavyansk. Because the minute
Yes.
even the pro Russian press, even Russian state media, starts reporting the Battle of Slavyansk or the fall of Slavyansk, that is going to be wretched for Ukrainian morale. And it's been great for the Ukrainians the fact that they have held on to this section of the Donbass for as long as they have. And you can debate the Russian approach to the war. You can debate, well, why didn't they go in sooner? Why didn't they use more men, et cetera, et cetera? All the questions that we've been talking about since 2022. But point being is the fact that Kramatorsk and Slovyansk especially are in Ukrainian hands in 2026 has been a massive boon to Ukrainian morale that has probably been a large part of the reason that the front line keeps going. Now, I'm not saying the fall of these cities spells the end of the Ukrainian war, far from.
No, it won't.
But what it does show is these are what they have been denying the Russians. Now, don't make any mistake, they don't give a damn about these cities. They're orcish
Yeah, yeah,
Russian
yeah.
cities as far as they're concerned. But the fact that the Russians don't have them has meant everything to the Ukrainians. So when that changes, and it will, we're going to see that in the near future, they are going to have to enter into a complete narrative damage control in order to correct for this.
They
And
will, and they will also. You're going to hear them telling the West that they have to do something. You remember what panic there was just before they lost Bakhmut,
yes,
right? To a lesser extent, that was also the case with Andreevka,
and Pokrovsk.
Pokrovsk as well. But they've learned how to ignore that. But this won't be like that. And really, the fortress city that was there to stop the Russians from getting to the fortress belt was Bakhmut. And the Russians took it in just a little over a year. You know, Ukraine could never take Donetsk city or Lugansk, and they lost Bakhmut. I know they still had hope that they could withstand the Russians. I mean, obviously, the strategy that Ukraine is using is to outlast Russia. This entire war, in every facet, and in whichever angle you choose to look at, is an attritional war. Both sides are using different philosophies of attrition to accomplish their goals. For the West, it's to make the Russian public so weary of the war, and the war becomes so unpopular that um, Putin is outed, or something happens, or they just refuse to fight anymore.
Prigozhin comes back from the dead and marches on Moscow again.
Yes, that's right.
That's
That's right.
the strategy. That's the positive thinking they're
Yeah.
engaging themselves in. But no, I agree with everything you had just said there. But also, when these cities fall, I expect a ramping up of drone strikes on both energy and civilian
Yes.
targets like
Yes.
nothing we've seen before. And that they're going to lean on the West, whether that is through the Americans directly or through the Europeans, to get more money, to get more armaments, to get whatever they can to throw into Russia proper in order to launch a punitive campaign for losing these cities. And that the more success Russia has, because this seems to be the Ukrainian strategy at this point, the more battlefield success Russia has, the more Ukraine will lash out against the Russian civilian populace and
Yep.
Russian infrastructure. Which is why it's been so, in my opinion, so bad in 2026, because now things are becoming abundantly clear. No matter how much the Ukrainians kick and scream, and no matter how many Russians they take with them, there is no viable path to victory for their war effort. There is only damaging the Russians as much as they can while they collapse themselves. And that has become, in effect, the national mission of Ukraine. We're not going to survive this war, but we're going to make sure that Russia comes out of this on a weaker end. So when the West finally comes in, they can avenge us. That is the mindset that seems to be
Yes.
permeating
Yes.
Ukraine's national identity right now.
Yeah. Except the West won't come in.
No, why would they? I mean, sometimes I think that Mertz and Macron or whoever else might be insane enough to try it, but
I
when
mean, okay. I should clarify. I should clarify. What I should have said was the U.S. won't go in. The
true,
U.S. will
true,
not go in. Ukraine Ukraine was always an American priority, and it still is a priority, but it's a priority that it sees the Europeans must fight, right?
yes, it is a war for the vassals. It's something that we have explicitly passed off on them, and this isn't just a Trump thing, by the way. This was Obama's idea back in 2014.
Right, right. Um, Remember that before this war started, Macron wasn't enthusiastic about it. He gave all kinds of indications. I'm going to go to Moscow. I think he did. They weren't as gung ho as you think, right? But I think once
Except the
Trump was
balls, but do they
inaugurated,
count?
But once Trump was inaugurated, I think it was abundantly clear that the vassals were going to fight this war. Now, I think they went through all the necessary steps to establish that. Hexeth, in a way, gave away the secret sauce of this geopolitical strategy when he said that you're going to essentially you're going to deal with Ukraine while we deal with the Middle East and China, right?
And
That's the
remember,
only thing
Pompeo
that
was
makes
writing
him.
about this back in 2024.
That's right. I mean, you have a lot of the American shit libs who will swear up and down that I almost think that they do this basically as a way to wish cast like support. By they think by claiming that, like in their heart of hearts, they know Trump can't stop the war, and it's very important for them, right? Like if especially like gay Westerners like Lindsey Graham were absolutely vehement about like supporting Ukraine because well we know that in Russia, gays don't have the kind of rights that they do in the West. Remember that 2 weeks ago, two Moes in Britain killed a boy that they adopted, a 9-month-old boy. I won't tell you what they did to him. Um, and of course, the service that can never happen in Russia. Russia set back Westernization. They Putin played along with these ideas. I mean, I'm not a fan of Putin, as you know,
I'm a
but
Putler shill, personally.
but he went along with these policies because he thought like I don't know what he thought. Maybe he thought, well, we'll change them later, or this
Well,
is what we have to do momentarily, or
if
the country will get wealthier, so maybe it's a good thing.
if I can speak in his defense, I
Well,
think he had a very rose-tinted view of the West that actually produced art and culture and something worth actually partaking in.
yeah, he might have thought this is just some aberration. It's like you just want to tell them, it's like, dude, they're not going to put the woke away. Do you
Yeah,
understand that?
it
They're never going to put it away. Like it can only be put away if something else is there to replace it. Do you see something on the event horizon that says something is going to replace the woke? I don't. I mean, maybe it's just not in your face, but it's also become now just a normal feature. Like no Western country can think of like not having gay marriage or gay adoption. Like it's inconceivable to them. It's become
Slovenia
completely
has gay
normative.
marriage. That's how bad
It's
it's gotten.
that's how bad it's gotten. Like they would rather the whole world become gay than like reform that.
No, you're right. Taiwan, they forced that through via court order. I remember that.
Yes.
That'll be funny when they reunify with China. Completely off topic, but apparently, I don't know how recent this was. I think it was pretty recently. The KMT had a party conference where one of their leadership was pretty much blaming the Jews for keeping China divided.
Oh my god. Yeah, wow. Based.
But yeah, that's the depending on polling, first or second most popular party in Taiwan. So maybe that's not as done as a deal as some people might think. But I'm getting sidetracked here. To get back to the overall Ukraine war, I think everything you just said about the West and Putin's infatuation with that is completely true. I can't really add much more to that. The idea that this, of course, has always been an American project, but has always been made to be fought by the vassals, as we saw with Obama, Trump 1, Biden especially, and now Trump 2, who came out and just laid it on the table and said, we're doing a division of labor. We need to take care of the Middle East and China. You guys make sure that Russia's tied down so that we can do that. And
Right.
here we are today. But I suppose
But I don't think they expected Iran to do so well in 2026?
Well, let me just put it this way. I was under no impression that the Iranians were going to crumble, and I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll talk about more about it later. But I'm actually surprised that they did as well as they did. I expected Iran to survive. I did not expect them to put up this fierce of resistance, though.
They're firing less missiles with far more accuracy. I mean, we'll get into it, but my gosh, they're doing incredibly well. They're getting hurt, no question, but America has not achieved its objectives.
Do you know who is firing more missiles with more accuracy, though?
Hmm.
That's Russia.
Yes, that's the other thing. You know, I'm glad you brought that up because we shouldn't move that quickly from the Ukraine topic.
No, because there's plenty to talk about with the strikes on Kiev and also the
Yes,
protests in Kiev as well.
yes, yeah, I completely forgot. Uh, I mean, what is so different, I think, this week that wasn't the case last week is Russia has mercilessly begun to attack Odessa in a way that it hasn't done before. It has done it in the past, but not so consistently. This week, 24 Ukrainian tankers were hit. Some of them were docked, some of them were in open waters in the Black Sea. 40% of Ukraine's ability to ship grain out of the country has been cut off. That's a very significant number because it's one of the few exports that they have that they can make money from. Otherwise, they're a financial black hole for the West. The other thing is now there's virtually no interception for their ballistic missiles. Now, some of these missiles are modified S-400 missiles. Yes, they can intercept some of them. I noticed an exchange from a day or two ago where two of the four missiles were intercepted, but the other two hit their targets in Odessa. They are going, of course, they're continuing to go after locomotives. They're continuing to destroy one office after another. And now the amount of gas stations that have been hit is over 240. It was 105 the last time we did the show with Geo. The city of Sumi has one gas station now, you know. Um, so I mean, I think this is something that frankly the Russian public was waiting for him to do for at least 2.5 years.
Oh yes, I would agree to this. And what I would say about that is they pulled their punches for, as you said, 2.5 years. But I think all that time suggests that they believed there was some sort of settlement to be had in this war out off the
Yes.
battlefield. That they wanted Ukraine largely intact because they were planning on integrating, of course, the four oblasts, but also having a working relationship with a post war Ukrainian state. And the best way to do that is to leave the vital infrastructure, all those things you just listed, intact. But it's becoming more and more clear as time has went on. Ukraine is nothing more than a kamikaze drone aimed right at Russia that is also doubling as a staging ground for any future Western military intervention.
Yeah.
So at that point, they need to break down any sort of logistical chains that would allow Ukraine to be used as a staging ground by, let's just say, a more robust European coalition in the event of the final fall of the AFU at some point. I'm not going to put a timeline on this. But let me just say, because I think a lot of people have a tendency to fall in this trap, and I have certainly before in the past, I don't believe that these kind of strikes are going to lead to the collapse of the Ukrainian state. They would have already if they were going to. That massive infrastructure bombing is not what collapses a country. We saw this with Iran. We saw this even with Iraq. It actually took a proper ground invasion in order to see the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. In Syria, it took proxy forces actually conducting ground operations to overthrow Bashar al Assad.
for
But
nearly 14 years.
yes, nearly 14 years. I think a lot of people forget that because of how rapid the final offensive was in November of 2024. A lot of people say Assad fell in 2 weeks. No, he fell in 14 years. Just to clarify that point.
Yeah, it
But
was over 13 and a half years because it started in the early spring of 2011.
yes,
Remember Arab Spring?
yes, and then it began in earnest in July of 2011 with an actual shooting civil war.
Yeah.
But with all that being said, what I think the Russians are trying to do right now is just logistically hamper the Ukrainian war effort. That might sound like a very simplistic statement, but that's what it's coming down to. They don't expect this to cause Zelensky's government to collapse or cause the Ukrainian state to collapse, but they do want to break down the efficacy of the Ukrainian military so their ground operation can't accomplish its goal. And what that final goal will end up looking like, I really can't say at this point because I don't think Istanbul plus Istanbul 2024 is on the table anymore. How could it be? If the Russians were to walk away with that, that would just be embarrassing.
Well, I mean, it would be, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't happen. Again, I think the tenor has changed. This is going to be just more escalation. One of the things that I think is different this week from last week is there has been a drop in Ukrainians being able to hit certain uh, and oil refineries. Now, they did hit a decoy plane in Engels Air Force Base, and this has happened before, where they were much more successful back in, I believe it was 2022 or 2023 in December. It was almost like one happened in November, then a month later it happened again. Okay, but I don't see as many, and I think these retaliatory strikes by the Russians have created a kind of discourse with Ukraine. And I think Ukraine might be pulling some of their punches right now in order to alleviate the pressure that they're facing. There was, for instance, one of the commanders responsible for the storage of weapons has been released from his duties because on the outskirts of southern Kiev, there's a town that starts with the letter V. I forget the name now, but like several blocks just blew up after one or two hits by the Russians because that was an ammo depot. They are hiding ammo in civilian structures. Now, the Ukrainians have always done this. And I think the Russians don't care now anymore whether they get bad press in the West or not. Um, in Kiev proper, today there was another storage facility that was hit, which housed UN food supplies. Of course, the Russians, I don't think they hit it because it had UN food supplies. I think they hit it because they expect that the Ukrainians are hiding, just as they do in postal service centers with these big warehouses, that they're hiding military equipment there, including ammunition from time to time. Although I must say I haven't seen a lot of ammunition blow up. There were some in June. Poltava was hit twice. But the Russians have really stepped up, like in Mykolaiv, or the Russians call it Nikolaev, on the Dnieper in the Kherson Oblast. 3 ships were hit. So this is a new policy. Like, if you are going to stop us from being able to ship, and something like the Ukrainians claim something like 200 ships, the Russians say they're exaggerating. But let's say 100 Russian ships have been hit, right? That's an awful lot. And now the Russians will send their shipments to go through St. Petersburg, but if Ukraine is going to do this to them, then Ukraine has to pay the same price. Like the Russians, put up with this for months in 2026.
And the ability for them to retaliate this way has always been there, and it boggles my mind that they waited so long.
Yeah, and like I said, it, in my opinion at least, it shows. I don't want to say naivete because I don't like attributing that to state actors, but I do think it shows an unrealistic optimism from somebody like Putin and his advisors and the Kremlin elite that they thought there could be some sort of settlement to this war. And one could argue that is the root of all the problems going back to 2014. The idea that they were too trusting about this, the idea that they were not willing to finish this. And that's a heavy statement to make because of what it implies, and because the effort and the lives lost on both sides and the destruction that would be wrought by conducting such a campaign. But I do think, as we're sitting here in 2026, at least from the Russian perspective, it was an inevitability. It had to happen at some point. It's just a question of when and how. And with that being said, there is now the speculation, I should say, that there's going to be another combat mobilization in Russia in September. Beyond just the regular conscript mobilization they have for the legally required military service, those guys don't see combat as a general rule. But in terms of actually calling up soldiers to be sent to Ukraine. And I've seen several sources report it. I'm always hesitant to lean one way or another on these things. But if that is the case, I would expect that they are looking at an endgame of possibly Odessa and possibly Kiev. I'm not saying that they would have a permanent occupation into these cities, but if they're having that much of a bolster in manpower, they probably are going for the killing blow, so to speak, where they're going to march in at some point. I'm not going to put a timeline on that, and dictate terms of what post-war Ukraine will look like. Now, perhaps I'm off base here. Perhaps a million more men is not enough to do something like that. But as the situation continues to degrade in Ukraine and as the Russians continue to militarize, I would assume something like that would be the goal. And perhaps I'm painting with too broad brushstrokes here. Please let me know, anyone, if you disagree with me on that point. But that's the only, I guess you could say, end I could see to this. And while one could argue that Putin was content to keep this war going, to keep it as a black hole of Western finance and equipment, the more the Ukrainians continue to strike into Russia proper, the more existential it does become. Now, I think I'm of the opinion, once again, that the Russians, from their strategic positioning, really had no choice but to start this war. It was either that or just let the slow encirclement continue. Their hand was almost forced on it. There were no good options with that. But point being is, just treating it as a war of attrition where the West can bleed themselves out in terms of finance and equipment, that's no longer the case when they're helping Ukraine with these asymmetrical attacks. And that the public in Russia is more outraged than ever, not at their own government, but at the West and at Ukraine. And their complaints towards their own government is not, why is this war happening, but the question is, why isn't this war been finished yet?
Yes, I think. Well, I hope he's beginning to understand that. Again, we'll have to wait to see how consistent this is. I do think he still believes. I mean, look at it from his point of view. The war has to end one way or another. But if it ends with it, okay, with like an armistice, or it ends without really ending, anything short of a working relationship with Ukraine, that's the first order of business. The second order is a working relationship with Europe, which is why they pressed so hard in late 2021 to come up with some kind of new security arrangement with the Americans and the Europeans. It was to avoid going to war. Because then again, a lot of people forget this, but we covered it in April of 2021 was the first time that Ukraine started using the Turkish drones to knock out artillery positions of the Donbass militias, and they actually regained some territory that they had lost, and people began leaving. Well, that happened later on in January, in the lead up to the war of 2022. But I think they understood what was happening, but that is the Russians. Nonetheless, they thought they could make some kind of an arrangement, some kind of a new deal, which of course was never going to happen. But again, he's thinking like, again, it's a war of attrition, and the attrition that the West is playing is you will never have peace again. You will have enmity forever. Just as with North and South Korea.
And that's something we had speculated back in, I think, even 2021, is that they were willing to turn Ukraine into a black hole to keep Russia tied up forever, if that's what needed to happen. And beyond any question of European escalation, which is still a fear of mine, don't get me wrong, I do fear that the idea of Ukraine as a wasteland to slowly bleed out Russia over the years and decades is in full swing and has a possibility of working.
Yeah, like I mean, if they keep what they're doing, it will run against cross purposes for the Europeans, in so much as several European countries right now are saying we will not accept any men fleeing the country that are of fighting age. But fighting age for them is like 23 to 60. I mean, that's a huge swath of the population.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if life becomes any harder, I mean, there's going to be women and children that are going to be leaving Ukraine, right?
I think the
Ukraine.
statistics based on anecdotal, well, I shouldn't call them statistics, but the anecdotes have been that there are entire classrooms in Ukrainian schools that have no boys left.
Yes. Yes.
Because everyone, every male under the age of 22 is finding some way or having somebody find them some way to get them the hell out of Ukraine.
Yeah. I know a few of them. I personally know a few of them.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here, but I was up towards the local Ukrainian community last weekend, and yeah, I could tell a lot of these guys were recent arrivals, and you know what? I have absolutely no problem with that. I'd prefer to have them here than in Zelensky's meat grinder. 10 times out of 10.
Yeah.
Like,
the ones that I know, of course, are still absolutely pro-Ukraine, but they will never go and fight.
yeah,
They will never go and fight. And they have jobs that can keep them here for now, because I can't get into details, obviously, because where they work has a certain amount of immunity.
yeah, and you'll notice, unlike other migrant groups, they have jobs.
Yes.
They're functional, they're semi-assimilated, and like I said, if personally, looking at the numbers, looking at everything, I would rather take every fighting age Ukrainian man in existence into the United States over the vast majority of any other immigrant group, if I'm being honest. Like, there's no loss
You can
there.
you can say Albanians. You don't have to dance around it.
So true.
It's a joke. It's
So
a joke.
true.
Okay.
Do you think we have any Albanian listeners?
Yeah, I don't think so. No. But I'm just joking, sheep that. So I mean, they did create this reputation all on their own. No one had to help them. But
Thank you,
any
USA.
thank you,
My best
USA.
friend.
just ask the British, anyways. Yeah. So But in
But
a way, this kind of dovetails to the protests that have erupted. Of course, in Lvov, we already discussed that.
yes, thank you. You just got to what I wanted to bring up next. But
But
that they've
now the
spread to
new
Kiev.
protests, yes. I mean, talking about people who really want the war to go on, but are not necessarily on the front lines. If you look at the demographics at these protests, I saw virtually no middle-aged people at all.
Yeah, that's what I saw. And keep in mind, that's with a Ukraine whose average age over the past 4 years has skyrocketed because the amount of youth who have either died in the war or left the country.
Yeah.
And you're right that it is the youth in Ukraine, particularly among the men in Kiev, the ones who are able to bribe their way to service or know somebody who knows somebody in order to get a more comfortable position where most of their time is spent off duty, whatever the scenario might be.
Yes.
They're out in the streets over the latest cabinet shuffle, which involves the defense minister. Now, Umerov, our favorite Tatar, is long gone, replaced
that,
by.
that was a merchant that was very happy, who ate very well.
Oh
But,
yes, you know who I miss? I miss Reznikov.
yes, yes.
Wasn't he in? He was in one of the European countries, just like swimming off the beach that one time during the 2023 counteroffensive. Maybe it was.
Yeah, he was.
It was Cyprus.
He
or
really
Greece.
was
It
living his best
yeah.
life.
And then he just disappeared. And one of those things that'll always live rent free in my head is just the way Emil Kosmin would always say Reznikov, the way he'd always roll the R on it.
Yes, yes. The other thing is this. I remember an article when he was in Britain, where he, like, as if he didn't know this, he discovered his Jewish roots. Like with a name like Resnick, you're supposed to believe he didn't question that he was, of Jewish descent. Like, are you serious?
It's like
Anyways,
the entire government of Ukraine is just made up of the most pale of settlement people imaginable, and it's like, oh, I'm Jewish. It's like you don't have the blood memory of the life in the Pale of Settlement. Of course you don't. Of course you don't. But keep in mind, those are the ones who didn't make it to Israel.
yeah,
Oh, imagine that. But the defense minister that succeeded Umerov was Fedorov, and I'm not sure who they have slated to replace him. I've seen things as far-reaching as Budanov. I've seen that they're going to put the current prime minister there. But point being is, this is like what, the third Ukrainian cabinet shuffle within a year, something like that.
yeah, yeah.
I'm sure they'll get it right this time.
The new guy that replaced Umerov has only been in there for 6 months.
Yeah, because I remember that. I remember when Umerov got fired because I thought it was kind of funny. But now he's out. And apparently, this Fedorov guy, the big thing behind that is he was feuding with Siersky. And
Yes.
I mean, it's. At what point are we at where Siersky is the most competent man in the room? Except Budanov, but he's not really part of this particular discussion. But in terms of this dispute between him, Zelensky, all these people, how far have we fallen when Siersky is the most sane one in the room? I don't like that. I do not like that at all. But yeah, he was all pissy, and look, I have to say, many people
Zelensky claimed they could not be together in the same room unless he was there. According to Zelensky.
You know what? I believe it. I believe him on this one. And while many people have doomsayed the Zelensky government before, claimed that, oh, this is the end, it's all unraveling, they're all tearing each other's throats out, I'm half inclined to believe that out of all the times this has ever happened, this is the closest to being true, especially when it comes to the loss of popular support. And as you said, these aren't the people in certain parts of central and southern and eastern Ukraine who are a little bit more ambivalent towards the war, will still get thrown to the back of the vans and go into the combat lines when they're forced to, but ultimately whose loyalties kind of go with the wind depending on whether the Russians or the Ukrainians are in control of their sector. But no, the protests out on the street in Kiev are the people, as you said, the adamant war supporters. And among the young men, these are the ones who have managed to buy their way out of service or find some other way to both remain in Ukraine and also not get conscripted, which I have a little bit of a story about the TCK later with that. And they're outraged against him. And that's, as you said, compounded with the fact that they were having draft riots in Lvov. The fact that the part of the country that most supports the war are getting drafted. And let me say, I'm no fan of the TCK. I don't think they should be conscripting anyone. I think this entire war was a disastrous mistake. But if you could make the argument, anyone in Ukraine who should be fighting this war are the people from Lvov and from Ivano-Frankovsk and
They're
from
the
these
ones who
areas.
wanted it the most.
Yeah, they're the ones who like to do the whole 1930s, 1940s LARP and pretend like they're the long lost Aryan cousins of the Great Reich or whatever the hell their narrative is. But yeah, if anyone should be fighting the war, it's them. On an individual level, I don't want to see that happen, but on a collective level, it's like better you than the people from Kherson or Zaporozhye or you know Donetsk, honestly. But with all that being said, this is also 2 years past Zelensky's end of term. There's still been no question of an election. And what's the end game for this? Do the protesters just disperse? Do they all go home after some minor concession? That I can believe because it doesn't seem like there's any real mechanism for a shift in power in Ukraine even without an election. If Zelensky were to resign tomorrow, what would that do? Who would replace him? What would the situation look like from there? And these protesters who, like I said, while I've expressed my opinions on them, in the abstract have very reasonable demands. What's their end goal? Like, put somebody better in power and we'll definitely win the war this time. I'm looking at two sides right here feuding who have no clear vision of the future. That's all I can really see right now with these protests in Kiev.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I noticed was, of course, there was almost a 50-50 split, but I would say there were still more women than men. I would say
Well, I think
80%.
demographically that's just a given in Ukraine these days.
Right, but I think also I would say 85% of the people are under 35 easily. Easily. Most look like they're in their 20s. Um One of the things that I thought of was I noticed that all the signs were just done with cardboard, so they're very impromptu.
And we're actually in Cyrillic. I'm not going to say whether it's Russian or Ukrainian, but you didn't see the English signs, which are a telltale sign
No,
of a lot of these things.
right. So this is organic. It's organic, organic in the sense that it's a small, less powerful, more disorganized group than the people who really do own Ukraine.
What are you implying?
So, so obviously they didn't see this coming, and they've rushed out, and I think some of those men that are there, maybe they bargained them, like no frontline service if you show up, because they have to look like if it was just almost all women, like
It would just look
that looks
hysterical.
yeah, right. Now of course it's all these young people, because this defense minister that has been let go is wildly popular. He was the architect of the spiderweb attacks against Russia. Now,
Huh.
Russia foiled two separate spiderweb attacks, or you could look at it as one large spiderweb attack that would stretch all the way from Moscow to Vladivostok, right? All the way from the Pacific to, Western Russia. Um, the other is maybe, I mean, I don't know. I don't have his ear. I don't know. I'm like
anybody else, though I'm only speculating why he let him go. I can't I can't imagine it was just because he didn't get along with Siersky.
Yeah,
I
clearly
mean,
there was.
there's only so much that Ukraine can do because they're limited. And so, of course, some of the drone strikes have been incredibly successful. Um, what if this decision was not something that was mulled over for a long time? I don't think it was. And I think just like the protests, it was an impromptu decision. I don't know if it was because the amount of places where they were storing munitions have been blown up. I don't, the Ukrainians successfully destroyed the munitions in the Donetsk area, for instance. So it happens both ways. Although I have to be honest, after half the year has gone by, I've seen the Russians hit munition depots much more often than the Ukrainians. So I don't know the reason why he's letting him go. Some people have speculated because he's afraid he's so popular. Some people have speculated that he gets along well with Zaluzhny, and Zaluzhny is somebody that is waiting to come back. Zelensky definitely doesn't want them in power, and as long as the protests don't look professional with really nice signs, over 50% of them are in English, then it's not a gay op. It's not the kind of gay op that is supported by the
Yeah,
West.
it's not the kind of thing that can actually overthrow him. It's just people
Right.
are
So the
pissed
West
off.
supports this. So the West supports this. And the only thing I can think of is, I don't know, at Ankara or when, or at the uh, Zelensky's visits to Europe, but particularly Ankara, because that's the most recent one. Maybe he's blamed for all the successful Russian counterattacks in Kiev. I don't know. But I mean, a lot of that has to deal with the fact that they don't have enough Patriot missiles. And Patriot missiles are now being used by the West in the Persian Gulf at an exorbitant rate.
Yeah, yes. Apparently,
Russia can attack and does attack at will.
as we've seen, and in a roundabout way, that's probably what ended up killing Lindsey Graham. I'm not saying, once again, I'm not saying that's a direct strike, but I'm saying he probably had a stress-induced heart attack because of a Russian strike, because they don't have any Patriot missiles to intercept. And as you said, they're being just burned through like nothing in the Gulf in this war against Iran, because as far as I can tell, the West has not discovered you can use flak guns to shoot down drones, and that they keep wasting Patriots on drones. This is something that both the Ukrainians and the
The,
Russians have figured out, that you can use flak artillery to take these things down and not waste $1 million systems, multi-million-dollar systems on $20,000 drones.
yeah. Right now, Greece is being pressured by the EU to give up its Patriot missiles and batteries
Yeah,
to
I'm really
to
glad
to, to
there's
Ukraine.
Western
And considering
European
the pressure that
solidarity.
Turkey's applying on Greece, Greece is, like, obviously, understandably, very hesitant to do so.
Oh yeah, and this is a point I think I've been hammering since the beginning of the show, that when it comes to Greece, when it comes to Bulgaria, when it comes to any of these Balkan countries, what they need to understand is that the minute the West thinks they can win favor with Turkey, you're getting thrown under the bus.
Yeah.
They've done it before. They've done it for centuries. They let you languish under Ottoman occupation for 400 years because it was convenient. They stopped the Russians from destroying the Ottoman Empire on several occasions. And you think now all of a sudden that you have NATO, that you have liberal democracy, they're not going to do the same thing over once they think they can, I don't know, convince Erdogan with another lucrative arms deal. I mean, just look at what just happened in Ankara. Trump's already talking about lifting sanctions on the Turks. He's already buddy with Erdogan again. Now, how long that'll last? Probably 2 weeks. Who knows? But point being is that's what these nations, Greece and Bulgaria in particular, right there on the border, fellow NATO members, that means nothing.
Hmm.
Yeah, and what didn't Greece already give up the Russian missile systems to Ukraine already back in 2022, 2023, that they acquired because of similar tensions with Turkey that they had back in the 90s? I'm pretty sure something like that happened in 2023, ahead of the counteroffensive. But no, these nations just expect to bleed themselves dry for really no benefit at all. And uh, this is the path forward with Europe. They're going to tell you about the great Russian threat. They're going to tell you that there's an existential war on the continent. So you have to disarm yourself in order to arm Ukraine to delay the inevitable, so that when the Russians do come, you're defenseless. Which is what they're telling the Europeans at this point. Now, I'm under no illusion that the Russians are going to march into Europe. If anything, it's probably going to be the other way around at this point. But yeah, that's to be America's friend is fatal, to quote Henry Kissinger. If I can just say that. But the last thing I'll talk about with Ukraine before we move on, because I don't want to linger too long, because we still have some Middle Eastern stuff to get to, was this bizarre thing about the Monaco assassins. And
This, yes.
so let me just read this verbatim. And this comes from those who are curious. Southfront. It comes from their Telegram channel, so take that for what you will. And I quote, audio recordings leaked by RT have transformed Ukrainian main director of intelligence, HUR, Colonel Vitaly Zhikovich, from a mere suspect in the Monaco assassination case to a fanatical terrorist. Zhikovich converted to Islam in order to recruit ISIS fighters and plotted to blow up the Crimean Bridge. He also cynically described his work as international terrorism. In order to infiltrate radical circles, Zhikovich disguised himself as a jihadist fighter and used minors and mentally unstable individuals as disposable weapons. In private conversations, he did not mince words about Ukraine's president, claiming that the leader demanded civilian casualties. His contacts reportedly included Mossad representatives, imagine that, with whom he discussed operation coordination. As it turns out, this man was no lone wolf, but a full-time military intelligence officer with access to state resources. How about that?
You know when this story first broke out? Because apparently he had an accomplice. We'll get to an accomplice to what later, but and his accomplice had a torture chamber. But the BBC tried to make it look like these guys were Russians that killed the suspect that tried to kill this Jewish oligarch in Monaco. Like it's, but no, they're Ukrainians. Like the oligarch's Ukrainian, but he had some dealings in Crimea.
As they all do.
Yes. The would-be assassin is Ukrainian, and the people who killed her are also Ukrainian, and they all worked for what is it at the GRU, the like military intelligence,
Yeah.
or some kind of an intelligence that is, let's say, equivalent to the CIA. So I don't know if you've seen it. If you watched the video footage.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on Telegram, haven't I?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so she's walking just ahead of the family that the bomb blows up around. She's just a little bit ahead. She obviously knows where they live. She has two bags. One bag she leaves at the doorstep, which is the bag with the bomb, obviously. And as soon as she descends back down the stairs, there were only about 4 or 5 stairs leading to the front door. Of course, there's a camera that she has placed there to give proof that she did this. And she goes on the phone. The phone is obviously going to be that which triggers the bomb, is my suspicion. I could be wrong. Because the camera would be the proof anyways, right? She wouldn't have to call him and say, hey, I just placed the bomb. She's not going to, the phone is there as a detonator. And the bomb goes off. The family is completely bliffy and unaware. Like, why did this person go up the stairs of our place and then just descend back down? And nobody noticed that she has one less bag with her. It's Monaco. I guess that felt incredibly safe.
Yeah, I
And
wouldn't
just like
imagine.
ours. I mean,
Aristovich went there and nothing happened. I was going through my photos on my Google Photos, and I noticed like the photo where he's pointing to Valhalla, but he's being ironic about it. Oh my God, he's
I
so
like
good.
how the minor amount of Ukrainian success in Zaporozhye has completely changed his worldview again.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Eh. Still, I would love to see a podcast between him and Richard Spencer. I'm more intelligent. No, I'm the genius. So
I hope it can happen one day. I would watch that.
I would watch it. Yeah. So anyways, she flies back or takes the train back to flies back to Ukraine, and she's killed. She's killed. Probably because she wasn't like an official agent, but was working for the agency. She was disposable. She was literally killed because she failed.
Yeah, that's what a patsy is.
Like it's a. I'm sorry to say it. It's a scum country.
Oh, of course. I mean, but I wasn't expecting anything more or less. Let's just put it that way. But I suppose with all that having been said, but I don't know what more one would expect from Ukraine these days.
Yeah, I mean, them releasing the footage, it tells you that, we don't care. We don't care. We should say that the guy who is replacing um, Fedorov is Khmara. I forget what his first name is. His name is Khmara. Anyways,
All these pale settlement names.
yeah, actually doesn't look very pale sediment, to be honest. To be fair.
You're right. My sensors are overreactive just from talking about Zelensky.
You've been overloaded. Like
I've,
eventually, all their leaders look a little bit like Zelensky after a while. But yeah, that footage was released, obviously because they don't care, because they know the West will never condemn them for it. They. I mean, I guess even some Westerners would say, "Well, she did fail."
the late Lindsey Graham probably would have said that.
Yes.
But with all that being said, last thing I'll touch on with Ukraine before we move on to some of the more Middle Eastern stuff is that Zelensky is now looking for a tough enforcer for the new mobilization. And I quote, Kiev may appoint a ruthless person to be head of the Ministry of Defense who will be responsible for making decisions to strengthen mobilization measures. This opinion was expressed by Rodion Mirozhnik, a special envoy of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So take that for what it is. According to him, Western military support requires Ukraine to fulfill certain conditions, including increasing the mobilization pool. Mirozhnik believes that Zelensky will need a tough minister who will implement painful decisions and ultimately bear the political consequences, because Zelensky can't be damned to do it himself. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, expect more TCC crackdowns. There was an interesting case where there was a car crash of TCK officers in Kryvyi Rog that may point to sabotage, which, I mean, can't blame the people for it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
who wouldn't? But just to breeze through a couple things with Europe before getting to the Middle East, Andy Burnham has officially taken office, so Keir Starmer is gone. Very sad. You know what? He was almost so hateable he was likable in a twisted sense. Let me just put it that way. You just had to appreciate how much he was hated by everyone for everything. The sanctions package, that's not going anywhere. Bulgaria is picking up the slack that Hungary left behind. Thanks to, I believe Radev is his new name, the prime minister, who is from a more right-wing populist background. So I suppose when it comes to these kind of things, it is a bit of a game of whack-a-mole. They got Orban, but they had carbon copy popped up in his place in Bulgaria, which is arguably more strategically significant with the way it's positioned on the Black Sea and its industry as well when it comes to the Ukrainian war effort. So that might have been a not exactly a worthwhile trade off, but if one were to look at it that way, one could say that. But even the wonderful man who defeated Viktor Orban, Peter Magyar, has still failed to deliver on the hawkish foreign policy that everyone wanted from him. Now, like I said, I have no illusions about this guy. He's a transitory figure. He's paving the way for somebody worse than him. But it is funny watching him just not live up to all these things that people really just projected onto him. So that's entertaining. And that's also on top of Slovakia, naturally. And I believe the Czech Republic also caved on this, not the sanctions package, but this new aid package they're trying to put together for Ukraine. So, yeah, it's not looking good when it comes to getting the aid when it's needed. Now, when it comes to these things always pass, but the more they're held up, the worse it is for Ukraine, and that's really what counts. And better yet, they're from across the EU, Russian energy imports are at a 3-year high. So,
I
well,
know, like they're still making boatloads of money.
so independent of Russian energy by, didn't they say 2027? I don't think it's happening.
Yeah.
I had the Trump speech slated, but I'm eager to get the Middle Eastern stuff because we are a touch pressed for time. But just know that our elections are secured and that China has been contained and that China will never rig another American election again.
They better not even think about it.
But to much more important news, because this is something Trump also opened his speech with, we're winning in Iran. The operation is going to be over soon. It's the toughest, it's the greatest thing you've ever seen. The strait is open. But no, you had this wave of new Iranian strikes, and the ones I wanted to focus on in particular were the ones targeted at Iraqi Kurdistan, because there's some speculation out of there
Yeah.
about the American strategy. Now, the question, since the operation has reignited, is when is the ground operation going to be? Is there going to be a ground operation? And a lot of people were pointing towards yes. Now, whether that was going to be a large ground operation, who knows? But apparently, as these questions were being talked over, the Iranians were hitting American bases and American assets in Iraqi Kurdistan that wouldn't serve as the staging ground for a full scale invasion, but for any sort of special ops, as it were, any sort of staging ground for to get people on the ground in small numbers for, I don't know, maybe targeted missions when it comes to certain sabotage or the neutralization of certain targets or assets, the kind of stuff that you would need a ground team for. Apparently, with that, we did see an active strike by the Iranians that preempted that. So I am inclined to believe, whether it was for like Karg Island or whether it was for Kashim or any of these other Gulf islands, that that may have been something that was on the table as far as the White House and the Pentagon were concerned. But it looks like those hopes have been dashed, and that we're mostly back to the trading of missile and drone salvos between both sides. Now, what I've noticed, interestingly, is that it's been between the Iranians and American assets and allies in the Gulf, and that Israel has largely been excluded from these. But at the same time, I'm not saying it stopped, but the Lebanon conflict has cooled down at least, so you haven't seen as much activity in, say, the Levant. And I know that right now they're trying to talk Jelani into going in and wiping out Hezbollah because he's certainly capable of it, and he's the greatest, our second greatest ally, as it were. But with all of this happening right now, I struggle to say anything different than last week beyond that we're on the carousel. We're going to trade strikes. It's going to be a gradual escalation in tensions. We're going to reach a point where the global energy markets reach a fever pitch. Everyone comes to the table, signs another memorandum of understanding. We have 6 weeks of peace, and then we go back to the cycle, because that's what it really feels like right now. And I could be wrong. Somebody could be willing to make a more escalatory move on either side. But as it stands now, I think the Iranians are satisfied with their, I guess you could call it a fortress strategy, where if there's any sort of external threat, any sort of threat to their control of the strait, any sort of threat to their taxation of the strait, as it were, charging of tolls, then they're going to respond. They're going to strike because this entire thing was allegedly, I'm not sure, but allegedly started over the fact that the Iranians were firing on ships that were trying to evade the tolls. And I don't know how true that is, but point being
Yeah.
is that's the
I mean,
story.
the Americans wanted to create a separate corridor, so it would like, I mean, in the memorandum of misunderstanding, or I mean, the thing is there was no misunderstanding.
The
The
memorandum of
Americans knew
code.
what the Americans knew what the Iranians wanted, and the Iranians knew what the Americans wanted. But it was the Americans that agreed that the status quo for the Strait of Hormuz, which was established after America started this war with Israel, um, would continue until a proper peace was negotiated, right? And then they wanted to, well, not really follow that, and so they thought, well, we're going to create a separate route around Bahrain, sorry, Oman, I guess a southern route, if you will. And the Iranians said, no, you're not going to take advantage of us. You haven't even stopped Israel from bombing southern Lebanon. And they did hit at least 2 ships. Um, and, they hit another 4 today. There's virtually no traffic today. Zero.
Yeah. And as to what's that going to do to the global energy market, I think that's a big question mark. But before we get into that question, I do want to talk about a few more things that are happening in the Gulf that I think are of pretty major significance, starting with what may look like a counterintuitive move to an American ground operation, which is an announcement after 23 years that American forces are finally leaving Iraq permanently.
Hmm.
And to me, now this could be reneged on, this could be a thing that doesn't ultimately go through. But when I read this and when I see that headline, I think that's a concession. That they are, yes, of course, going to continue to bomb Iran. They're going to try to find regime change by other means. But the idea
Yes.
of an American ground operation seems far less likely if they're giving up one of their primary staging positions. And I know it's a geographical nightmare to invade Iran from Iraq, as Saddam Hussein discovered in 1980. But point being is they left Afghanistan with no real prospects of returning. They're leaving Iraq. They're evacuating their Gulf bases with very little prospects to refill them. And a lot of that, yes, is pragmatic because these positions are not defensible. But it also suggests that if there's going to be an operation against Iran, even under heavy fire, they would be increasing military presence on the ground in the region. Sure, they can sail 3 carrier groups out to outside the Persian Gulf, outside of missile range if they want to. They can conduct air operations, long air operations from NATO bases in Europe. But at the end of the day, if they're planning for a great stroke against the Iranians, one would think they would need their vital positions in both Iraq and the Gulf states, which they are fleeing from at record rate, as it seems.
Hmm.
Now, like I said, I think two things can be true at once. They are full bore dedicated to regime change. They're going to continue strikes on Iran, but they realize that a ground operation is a fundamental impossibility. Trump can get up there and he can drone on about Karg Island or Kashem or taking their oil or whatever other operation, whatever he heard from Jack Keane on Fox and Friends. But at the end of the day, it's just simply not going to happen. There are not the resources to make that happen there. And
I mean, just look at the situation that has been unfolding in the last 48 hours. Whatever that America is able to do against Iran, and they're destroying several bridges and railways lately, civilian infrastructure, so forth and so on. Iran has, from what it looks like, they have taken out a Patriot system. They have, I believe that one was in Kuwait or Iraq. And again, in Iraq, in Erlib, which is in Kurdish Iraq, uh, the the Iranians hit a ammunition depot. You can see the video, secondary explosions that happened just tonight, and they took out what appears to be a HIMARS. Either again, I forget whether the HIMARS was in Kuwait or Iraq. But there were HIMARS attacks yesterday, but not today. Yesterday, but not today. Which leads me to believe that just like the Russians, they're able to hit HIMARS. I am positive the Russians are helping them geolocate these places, these batteries, because of course the Russians have destroyed dozens of HIMARS launchers and Patriot launchers. No question. And I'm looking at the speed of some of these ballistic missiles hitting Iraq. uh it's very impressive, and it's also very interesting that along with Iraq, they're not focusing so much on Qatar and the UAE, but they're definitely focusing in on Kuwait and Bahrain. And that is, people have speculated that the reason for that is both those countries have a large Shia Muslim population that don't like the Sunni ruling class, which are a minority.
Yes, and it's. I remember back during the Arab Spring, I would have been much younger at the time, but as I started to become more aware of these things and research these things in retrospect, that you had all these uprisings across the Arab world that toppled Gaddafi and Mubarak and whoever that guy in Tunisia was, and of course the start of the Syrian civil war. The minute those protests spread to Bahrain, they were shut down very quickly.
Yeah.
And I have to say, when it comes to this, I can't remember who said it. It was maybe one of the Russian commentators, but I can't.
No, it's the Hungarian guy. Retarded ramblings.
Yeah,
I thought he's smart. I thought he was onto something.
oh yeah. But what I was going to refer to before I get to that is that somebody, I think it was one of the Russian commentators, said that Sykes-Picot is dead, and I fully believe that. That the
Psych. Okay, go on.
that the states created post World War One that were eventually given independence by the British and
Yes.
French empires, respectively. That it's untenable. Uh, the idea of the Emiratis existing as a country after this, the idea that they have some great longevity and won't just be folded back into Oman at some point, I I don't see any other way, really. The idea that we're going to have these bizarre Gulf oil sheikdoms that are able to stay in power despite these very strange border arrangements and everything else that goes along with it. I'll just leave it at that. These borders are untenable. They were created by the British and French empires, and I'm not saying that is like some sort of moral condemnation. That's what empires do. They were inherited by the American Empire, and now that that's blown up, these states, sure, they have some history behind them, but they're not Iran, they're not Turkey, they're not Egypt, because that's one of the more stable ones in that regard. They're all very transient new countries that, when their patronage network breaks down, I question their ability to survive. Now, something like Saudi Arabia probably will survive in some form, but a lot of these smaller Gulf states like Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, you have to wonder what's that going to look like. Even Iraq and Syria, even getting into that, what's the end game there? Those are both dysfunctional states. They haven't been unified since the fall of Saddam and Assad, respectively, and it, we're open to a world where the map of the Middle East is probably going to be de facto redrawn in the near future, if not officially redrawn.
It does seem that way, and the Kurds will get nothing.
Naturally. Nor do they deserve anything. Fell for it again award, Dog of the Empire award, died for nothing award.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth considering the amount of attacks that Iran has prosecuted in Kurdish Iraq ever since the beginning of this war indicates to me that they are fully aware of an insurgency by the Kurds, and that there are and we know now that there were Israeli troops and intelligence assets in that area as well as American. The fact that they figured out where the ammunition depot they took the other day, yesterday they took out. It's it's in Persian, it's in Farsi, but with they use a form of Arabic script. 8 high-ranking Kurdish military. I don't know what you want to call them. There was no translation. We're taking it out as well, according to Farsi News. So, make of that what you will. But I think this is hampering any kind of idea, and I'm sure the idea is very real, for the Americans to use the Kurds to ignite a civil war in Iran. And I mean, I think they're serious about this. Now, America's favorite former Al Qaeda member, Al Jilani, was publicly, was asked again while sitting you know, next to Trump. Trump asked him, maybe he can do something for us with Hezbollah in Lebanon, as if like, hey, I'm going to lift the sanctions, but you're going to have to start a war with Lebanon, as if he's going to do this, right? He's not. I can't see him doing it. They're in no position to do it, and they would lose territory, and not just to Jews, but it would be to Shia Muslims.
I mean, at that
Um,
point, I think a lot of the, I guess you call them more moderate Sunni base of Syria would turn on him.
yes, but also I would say the Christians in Lebanon would too.
Oh, absolutely. Any bridges between Israel and their, I guess you could say, proxies, it's so far as you want to consider Jolani one. But point being is the love affair between the Lebanese Christians and the Israelis is dead and buried, and has been for a number of years now.
And the hatred between them and Sunnis has never ended. So I don't see that happening. So now, what is Trump going to do? How long can he? They just don't make enough Patriot missiles. I think what we're seeing now is the lack of Patriot missiles affecting both the Ukrainian and um, the Persian Gulf theater.
Nor is there any industrial effort in the United States that would have quick enough turnaround to meet those quotas.
Yeah, I mean, we've been saying this since 2022, late 2022.
Oh yeah, American stockpiles are
That
simply not
if
there.
that's right. If you don't increase production, you're not serious about winning this war.
But I suppose to further that point, we have the Houthi strikes into Saudi Arabia once again, and
Yes.
they were striking near Riyadh Airport among other targets. But the statement they made with Riyadh is that they are going to continue the strikes on Riyadh until there is a lift on the blockade of Sana'a International Airport in Lebanon. I'm sorry, not Lebanon, Yemen. And that shows once again the Saudis are left holding the bag because there's not enough interceptor missiles for them either. And God forbid anything start in East Asia. What's that going to look like? If some war were to break out on the Korean Peninsula again, South Korea would not have enough interceptors. If there were to actually be military operations around Taiwan, there wouldn't be enough interceptors there. If something were to occur between the Japanese and the Japanese don't have enough interceptors, and I mean they hardly have a military as it is. I mean, yes, they have an armed forces, but you look at the post-war treaties, you look at the structure of their country, they don't exactly have a military as one would understand it. So America's locked into both the Middle East and Ukraine, yet does not have the resources to wage either of those wars.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called bad planning.
Imagine that.
Yeah, it turns out it wasn't 4D chess.
You mean Iran wasn't 3 weeks from collapsing?
See, of course, my usual fear is that they don't want to lose, and their options for not losing are terrible. That's what worries me.
Yeah, that's nuclear weapons, just to come out and say it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
Uh,
I think it's a worse question. What happens if they launch a nuke at Iran and Iran perseveres? Because I think everyone's caught up in this mythology of, well, we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Japanese surrendered. No, the Japanese surrendered because the Soviet Union was pushing into Korea. They were in Manchuria, and
yeah, they completed. It was literal revenge for 1905. The Russians it was the quickest advance of the entire war. Actually was not on the European theater. Once Stalingrad fell, but rather in in Manchuria, Korea, that whole area. They knew at that point it was over, and so did the Americans, but they just couldn't resist dropping the bomb.
yeah, and it was a message to the Soviet Union that we have the atom bomb and you do not.
Yes, absolutely. This
But
is what we can do to you.
for 80 years, the mythology has persisted. The Japanese surrendered because we dropped the nukes, and even among our elites, especially among somebody with a as one track mind as Donald Trump, who certainly does not understand those kind of nuances, he's really going to be taking on that idea. Like, well, we nuked Japan, and now they do everything I tell them to.
Yeah.
So if we do it to the Iranians, the exact same thing will happen. And what happens if they do that and the Iranians do not? I mean, how many nuclear weapons are they willing to use to subjugate this country? And what are the ramifications for that? At what point does the ideas of somebody like Karaganov start to find, I don't know, maybe some traction among the Russian elite and Poland gets nuked or whatever it might be? I'm not saying it would go that far, but you do open the door to those kind of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose the last thing we should talk about in relation to all this is the global energy market and this growing idea I have that the Americans might be doing a scorched earth campaign even at their own expense.
Yes.
And I want you to all to consider. Number one, we have the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. We have the Americans walking away from a perfectly workable memorandum of understanding that could have very well led to a deal that at least kept the strait open and kept the global energy market stable. That combined with the increased strikes on Russian energy sites, once again, we're talking about one of the world's largest energy exporters, and Venezuela, allegedly all the oil coming from there is going to be our big windfall and we're going to make up for our energy crisis that way. But at the same time, the strategic reserves of both the United States and Europe are woefully depleted. And if this crisis is to continue and to escalate, we could see, realistically, before the end of summer, an actual energy crisis on par with, if not greater than 1973. And what I think might be part of that, if one will indulge my theory here, is that they're willing to do that. They're willing to let the rest of the world languish. They're willing to do the scorched earth policy. They're willing to put austerity measures on the American public. They're willing to make us queue up for gas and, if your license plate ends in an odd number, say you get gas or whatever system they decide to implement. Imagine trying to do that in 2026 America with all the social unrest. Oh, that would be something.
What would you prefer, a nuclear war? Huh?
Maybe. Who knows?
The lines are getting ridiculous, Trump. Oh yeah, the lines in Russia are even worse.
Yeah, I can already see the Hezbollah.
I know. You can just imagine, right? He's such a piece of shit.
No, that's exactly what they would do. But no, I could very realistically see a scenario where they where they tell the American people to go pound sand, that you don't have it as bad as they do in Europe or Russia or the Middle East or
Yeah, they
whatever.
would. They would.
But overall, as global strategy, they could say we can weather this crisis better than you guys can. The Europeans can
Yes.
starve of oil. The Chinese can starve of oil. Um, Whoever else can starve of oil. Surely the Russians won't because they have a large enough domestic industry. But that would come at the cost of their exports, which they supply much of the rest of the world with their oil. And I could see very well a strategy among some people in the Pentagon, in the White House, State Department, CIA, the quote unquote deep state, if you will, who are willing to tank the global energy market if it means preserving some shred of American hegemony for even just another decade.
Yeah, I honestly could see that because one of the ways that the war in Ukraine has been conducted is if we do this long enough, maybe some other opportunities could come along the way. Like there isn't really a plan, but there is a kind of wish casting that we can trick the Russians this way, and meanwhile, in the process, maybe some other weapon will be developed. Maybe like you could argue in the first half of 2026 that policy has kind of worked. Uh, instead of actually investing money in making more military hardware and well, particularly munitions. Now they have successfully changed the war to be almost entirely about drones, but you still need infantry vehicles, like you still need all these other kinds of military vehicles and armaments.
Yeah,
uh, but and as we've discussed on the show before, Ukraine loses those vehicles at a much higher rate. Um, and for the fourth month in a row, an exchange of the dead has occurred. Uh, 501 Ukrainians to 31 Russians. So it's still at over 10-1.
Ukraine is winning.
Ukraine they really are winning. They're all Colombians anyways.
Hey, there's some Brazilians in there.
There's some Brazilians in there. Yeah. There was a new tally of the latest 1,200 confirmed dead mercenaries in Ukraine. The largest is by far is Colombians, and I think Americans are second.
Yeah, that.
But before 2024, like really the highest were Georgians.
I was about to say I noticed the lack of Georgians and Poles on that list.
Yeah, yeah. So it's changed. Americans, had because more of them joined, but so they were in the top four, 5 or 6 anyways. But um, yeah, I guess the not as many Poles and Georgians are joining.
I mean, can you blame them? I
Yeah.
think the ones who were willing to throw their lives away have already done so. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying there's any loss between Russia and Poland or Russia and Georgia, but I don't see many of them at this point who are lining up to die for it.
Yeah.
And but as far as the Colombians and Brazilians are concerned, that's just mercenary work. That's just what they do. There's no um, greater driving force behind any of that. You get the paycheck and you hope you survive. But I to cap out the show here because we're running up
Hmm.
on almost like 2.5 hours here.
Yeah.
My big fear, well, the beginning of the year it was more so a war in continental Europe, which is still a concern of mine. My big fear is that they're willing to destroy the global economy and global energy market just to get one over on the Russians and the Chinese. And I think they will. At this point, well, of course, Zionist influence is strong, and they would be happy to see Iran keep getting bombed. I don't even think it's necessarily about Israel at this point. It's about a scorched earth strategy of the American empire that is supposedly going to make us stronger, but is going to eventually reverberate home. And the only people who are going to benefit from this are a small handful of people in Washington who preserve their position for the short term at least, while making it worse themselves in the long term, instead of, I don't know, negotiating an exit from these imperial overreaches that they have that might be able to let them preserve a little bit less for a lot longer, but instead chose to preserve everything they have for a much shorter term, which shows that these people are 40 chess strategic geniuses. I can't believe Lindsey Graham didn't live to see it. He didn't live to see the scorched shirt strategy.
That's
What a
right.
shame.
That's right.
But at least we still have Mitch
Isn't that
McConnell.
funny? He always wanted a war in Ukraine. I mean, it was not a war that he didn't want, but he always wanted a war in Ukraine, and he didn't live to see it through.
Well, maybe it's actually a little bit of a good thing for him that he didn't see Russia win.
Yeah, you know, that's right. Yeah,
He tapped out after going to Kiev. He saw how hopeless the situation was.
that's right. Yeah,
You see, I'm a
somehow I doubt it, but yeah.
I'm a moral superior person because I only make jokes about the circumstance of his death, not the death itself. That's my cope for tonight, among many others. But do you have any final piece of news here?
The last bit I'll say is there are rumors now. It's
Oh,
still
I love
persisting.
rumors.
I noticed this last week, and it's still, every few days it'll pop up again. But there are rumors that Putin is going to have another mobilization by September of this year. We'll see. Remember, he's got an army of at least 100,000 in Belarus. So
Yeah. Let me. I'll believe it when I see it, but I'm not putting it past that.
mhm.
But I suppose if it's the right word, I'll be interested to see what happens with that because I would prefer to see this Ukraine war concluded sooner rather than later. But it's not something you can force, of course.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'm of the opinion the Russians have to be decisive. If there's going to be any hope of a long-term peace in Europe, the Russians have to show that they're a competent military force that can capitulate, force Ukraine to capitulate, and establish deterrence. And while I think Karaganov is at best a quack, at worst a provocateur, he does speak a kernel of truth when he says that Russia does need to
Yeah.
reestablish deterrence. Now, I don't think that comes in the form of striking or nuking Poland, but something needs to be done. And perhaps another mobilization and a renewed wave of offensives on Ukraine that actually does significantly set them back, maybe to what we saw in 2022, is what needs
Mhm.
to happen. Now, like I said, time will tell with all that, but that's all I really have to say about that.
Yeah, I don't have any other news.
Well, in
But
that,
anyways, we'll see.
yeah,
Things could radically change next week.
we'll see you guys next time on the Nothing Ever Happens report, and goodbye.
Fine, take care.